This isn't something that's only about phone hacking. There was microphones in window boxes outside the house. There were trackers, microphones dropped into my car. There were medical records of me and mothers of my children, for instance, all blagged and stolen out of the NHS. And perhaps most spectacularly, the burglary of both my flat and my office.
Speaking to me in an ITV documentary, this is Hugh Grant's first interview since his settlement with the Sun newspaper. He made these claims in his recent legal action, allegations the newspaper has always strongly denied.
In the case of my flat burglary, yeah, it was quite spectacular in that the whole door had been taken off its hinges and nothing was stolen. They'd been there to get information, and a lot of information about the interior and the contents of my flat appeared in newspapers a couple of days later.
How do you feel today here?
He says he reluctantly settled out of court for an enormous sum of money because even if he'd won at trial, he could have faced a £10 million bill. The Sun settled without any admission of liability.
If you're innocent, why do you shove so much money at someone not to go to court?
Newsgroup newspapers told us in some disputed cases it's made commercial sense to settle before trial. The scars of unlawful tabloid tactics run deep.
From the ages of 15 to 21 essentially, I had an inescapable abuser. The press.
From the age of 16, Charlotte Church was being hacked by the News of the World.
There's just a level of paranoia and anxiety. We used to say, oh God, have they tapped our phones? Have they got microphones in our house?
Let's go.
So my mother, already an incredibly vulnerable woman, her mental health was really bad, and I'd found her after taking an overdose. She was in a really bad way, and that was straight in the press. Straight in the press, no idea again where it came from. I mean, it was horrific. And she's never been able to fully come back from the abuse that she suffered.
In 2012, the publisher of the News of the World paid substantial damages and offered its sincere apologies.
Them times were like the best times in my life, until I started getting hacked and that.
Even national heroes became victims.
And I went paranoid. So I went out and bought 6 phones. So I just kept on changing numbers. And you think, God, when's it going to stop? Yeah, and I come a recluse. Didn't want to speak to nobody.
Paul Gascoigne was unlawfully targeted by Sun tabloids as he was struggling with addiction and treated in rehab.
I was just speaking to my mum and dad, and just them. The next day it'd come out in the papers. So I went mad. I said, what the are you speaking to the papers for? I said, well, I haven't spoken to them. I said, you have. You're the only 2 I've spoken to. I love my mum and dad. So to think they thought they were hackers was good.
In 2015, Mirror Group newspapers were ordered to pay damages and apologised. A claim against the News of the World was settled with a full apology in 2012. The Sun settled later without admitting liability. Other allegations reach the very heart of power.
There seemed to be no limits to what this group would do.
Despite the publisher's strenuous denials, Gordon Brown has accused Newsgroup newspapers of unlawful information gathering since he gave evidence under oath at the Levenson inquiry.
My bank account was broken into, my building society account was broken into, my gas bill, my electricity bill, my telecommunications bill. I know that they tried to get information from the police computer about me. All these things happened to me during the period I was Chancellor and Prime Minister.
This respected statesman now joining others, calling for fresh criminal investigations.
I don't hold massive grievances against the foot soldiers or these guys who did this stuff. Not against them, but I remain bitter and determined to exact justice on the executives who commissioned this stuff.
Despite apologies and more than £1 billion spent on legal fees and payouts by two of Britain's biggest newspaper groups, for many, the pain endures.
Some really emotional interviews there, Rebecca. It still has such a huge impact on people.
Yeah, I mean, some people say to me, phone hacking, wasn't that something that was exposed and settled decades ago? But what I've discovered when I've covered court cases, when I've interviewed people, and in this documentary, is that unlawful invasions into privacy can have really long-lasting impacts. And I think that those interviews give a really visceral insight into the psychological and the emotional impacts that they can have, even years on. The famous people that I've spoken to all tell me the same thing, that they are speaking out on behalf of people who were not famous, but were victims too. And there's one person in particular who feels so strongly about this and significantly has the financial firepower to see this through the courts, and that is, of course, Prince Harry.
What we've done is to pull together masses and masses of new evidence which has been disclosed as nearly 2,000 people have been suing through the courts over the phone hacking. And it's like kind of treasure, journalistic treasure that's been lying there. And with very few exceptions, Fleet Street hasn't covered it, because Fleet Street doesn't really like the look of it. The first thing that this new evidence shows us is that there was a huge operation from within the Murdoch company targeting politicians and their voicemail. And as far as we can tell, this wasn't about uncovering stories about them doing something embarrassing. It looks as though it was gathering political intelligence, which makes us think that quite apart from what was going on the journalistic side of the Murdoch operation, there's something on the commercial side that's busy using criminal methods to interfere with the heart of government. I'm being slightly cautious in the way I put this, because this is a question of evidence that's emerging. You can see the foundation. You can't necessarily see the whole structure that's going to emerge on top of it. But it looks as though there was a very significant political and commercial espionage operation going on from within the Murdoch building in London.
One of the outrageous and unjust things, in my view, which we need to look at in the way that the English and Welsh legal system works on a civil matter like this, is you make a claim, and if the defendant offers more than your lawyers think you would get in court, then you have a big problem, because if you do go to court, even if you win, even if the judge says, yes, I'm going to give you £200,000, and if Murdoch has already offered you £250,000, to take an example, then that means that you will have to pay all of Murdoch's legal costs, all of them. And believe me, you just look at that court hearing on Tuesday and you see the sort of silky, well-suited, well-tailored cases and people from Clifford Chance that Murdoch has arrayed on his side of the court, and this is not going to be cheap. So it would be millions. And for me, therefore, I had a very simple choice. Do I take a large check from News Corp to settle, or do I go bankrupt?
It's quite an easy decision.
It's a quite easy decision. Now, maybe at some point we will have someone who is both angry enough and rich enough to go all the way to court, who wants to spend the money and actually take the risk that the judge will give more, as long as the judge gives more than they've offered. But up until now, I think the legal strategy for News Group has been very simple. It has been to offer more than anybody realistically thinks they could get in court, and that keeps it out of open court. So
thanks so much. All that. It was not my choice to be standing here today. I wanted to go to trial. I wanted to expose the criminality that runs through the heart of this corporation. a criminality demonstrated clearly and irrevocably by the evidence which I have seen. I wanted to share news group secrets just as they have shared mine. Unfortunately, that legal recourse is not available to me or to anyone who does not have countless millions of pounds to spend on the pursuit of justice. Until someone comes along who can confront the Murdoch's endless means, all that I have left are these words, and they are the truth. As recently as Tuesday afternoon, lawyers for News Group attempted to get this hearing adjourned and to stop me and others from having their statements read today. It is more than a little ironic that they will go to such lengths to conceal and protect their privacy. It was a practice that they would break the law. It was a practice that they would steal legally protected information. It is a fact that they stole my own medical records and published that I had had a pregnancy. And yet they continue to wage a war against a legal inquiry into this illegal and frankly disgraceful behaviour. It is a part of my case that Rebecca Brooks confirmed to those that represent me that she knew about my pregnancy in the most vulnerable moment of my life. It is a part of my case that she assured those that represent me that she would not print that information. And it is a part of my case that she, the Sun, did print that information.
Victim of phone hacking. Blamed a family member, blamed a sister for a really intimate story getting into the newspapers because her sister was the only person that she'd told. And it never crossed her mind that exchanges on voicemail between her and her sister had been listened to by investigators working for newspapers or by newspaper journalists. Just have a think about that for a minute. Your sister is the only person that knows you are, let's say, pregnant. Right? The only person you've told is your sister. And it turns up in a newspaper the next day. So what do you do? Who do you blame? She's the only person you've told. So you check. I mean, did you tell anyone? No, I promise, I swear, of course I didn't tell anyone. You must have told someone. How's it got into the paper? Think about the damage that could do to a relationship. And now, particularly if you're someone who spends a lot of time on social media attacking Prince Harry and his wife, now just think about the possibility, or the allegation, not even the fact, just the possibility that he has spent his entire life at constant risk of that sort of betrayal of trust.
He'll take the stand. He'll be in court. He wants to do this, I'm imagining, because he somehow thinks of it as vindication for everything that his mother went through and everything that she died actually for. And I wonder whether somewhere this has become a very, very emotional question for Harry. It's clearly not about the money. He's just saying, I want to see Murdoch brought to his knees over this.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, look, I think that he's got the money to do it. And crucially, he's got the will to do it. Harry's been there. He's done it. Mm-hmm. And his whole objective isn't to get the money. It is to, I think in some sense, we saw it when we saw the Meghan and Harry documentary. We saw it in Spare. I think there's a sense he has of destiny with this, that this is his role now, is to bring truth, to teach truth to these institutions. It is Harry against the world. And the reason this matters isn't just because this is like a royal salacious story. The point is that if this does come to trial, and this does start in January of next year, as Jim was saying, then the capacity for collateral damage and for huge damage, not only against Murdoch, not only against the wider press, but indeed the collateral damage on the royal family itself could be huge. Yeah. And we know, frankly, he doesn't care.
You know, Prince Harry's got 3 pieces of litigation going on against the Mail, against the Murdoch Company, and today his case against the Daily Mirror starts. The Significance of Harry is twofold. A, he's got enough money that he is saying, I don't care what you offer me, I don't care how much it costs if I lose, I'm going to have a hearing. Do you know there's there's nearly 2,000 phone hacking cases have been silenced, where the people suing have been paid off before they could get to court. The risks of going on were just too terrifying financially. Okay, so we are moving towards an evidentiary hearing. The other point of Harry is, if, as is expected, he turns up to give evidence, the newspapers who would like to ignore this story can't do that. They're going to have to cover it. It's beautiful. But what isn't going to happen is that you're going to see structural reform of newspapers in this country so that they start telling the truth instead of dealing in falsehood and distortion. If we had succeeded, we would have that. This country would still be in the European Union if we'd achieved that. But you still have newspapers who abuse their power and, using falsehood, distortion and spite, damage this country over and over again.
So you've got 3 cases coming forward, all similar, all denied, involving the 3 biggest newspaper companies in the country. And there's nothing left after that, except the one, of course, that's owned by the son of the KGB agent who's being sanctioned in Ukraine. The agent has been sanctioned in Ukraine, the son hasn't. The son was put in the House of Lords by Boris Johnson after he was advised not to by the security services. So where are you going to read this stuff tomorrow? Where are you going to hear it? Who are you going to trust? Look what they've done to The Guardian. Not my favourite paper, I'll be honest with you. They're tearing each other apart over transgender issues and Jeremy Corbyn. I almost forget what a unique role they hold in the British media, it seems to me sometimes, over at The Guardian and The Observer. But where are you going to get this stuff tomorrow? Where's it going to be? Who's going to give you honest coverage of this incredibly important story? Where are you going to get it? Are you going to get it in the Express? No, that's owned by Mirror Group. Are you going to get it in the Mail? No, that's owned by DMGT. They've got a court case coming down the pipeline as well. You're going to get it in the Sun? No, because same empire as the News of the World, which was the dam that broke first, and they've got all manner of problems facing them. Already made loads of payouts, as have the Mirror Group, without admitting any wrongdoing for the reasons that I explained to you yesterday, known as a Part 36 quite often. So you're not going to get it in the Express, you're not going to get it in the Mirror, you're not going to get it in the Sun, you're not going to get it in the Times, you're not going to get it in the Sunday Times or the Sun on Sunday or the Sunday Express or the Sunday Mirror or the Sunday People. Telegraph? Good luck with that. Guardian, I can't trust a thing you read in The Guardian. Bloody lefties. The Eye, I forget how the breakdown works between the Lebedevs and the Daily Mail, but it's unlikely. There are good journalists on all of these papers, let me be absolutely clear about that. But if you think Prince Harry's getting a bit carried away when he talks about the threat to journalism, not a threat, the damage already done to journalism, then just ask yourself that question. Where am I going to read this tomorrow? Luckily, I'll be here. I was told once that Piers Morgan was Paul Dacre's choice to replace him as editor of the Daily Mail. I don't know whether that's true or not, but my source on that was impeccable. What I do know is that Rupert Murdoch offered Paul Dacre the editorship of the Times, which forced the hand of the owner of the Daily Mail into moving Sir David English and putting Paul Dacre in charge of the Daily Mail. But Murdoch wanted him at the Times. When he was at the Daily Mail, he had a deputy editor called Tony Gallagher, who has subsequently gone on to edit the Daily Telegraph, the Sun, and now the Times. So that's 4 newspapers, 2 men. Add Piers Morgan to the mix, who edited both the News of the World and the Daily Mirror. That's 7 newspapers and 3 men, all of whom will be chummy and all of whom will have arrangements in place that ensure that not only if I scratch my back, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, but also, of course, that we won't air each other's dirty laundry in public. So Gallagher in particular is fascinating because he's managed to be deputy editor of the Daily Mail, editor of the Daily Telegraph, editor of the Sun, and now editor of the Times. So what will the Times, which is in so many other areas the newspaper of repute, the only newspaper of repute left in this country that's not ostensibly left-wing, i.e. there's only The Guardian, really, and then you've got the FT, which occupies a unique space. So the editor of the Times has already edited the Sun, the Telegraph, and deputy edited the Daily Mail, describing Paul Dacre as, in many ways, his hero. So that's what is meant sometimes when people talk about a sort of almost mafioso nature to the print media in this country. What is the likelihood of any of those men telling the truth about each other's?
Harry says he has, quote, slayed dragons. Piers Morgan, former Daily Mirror editor, called Harry greedy and a hypocrite. In my humble opinion, as a journalist who's worked for many, many years, I would say that Harry's win yesterday should be on the front page of every single newspaper in this country. But lo and behold, it isn't. The headlines should read, "Princely Victory! Harry wins war against tabloid phone hackers." Instead, it's a front-page conspiracy of silence, with one notable exception: The Guardian. In my view, this is a huge news story. Harry has won a significant victory against the abuse of power by Mirror Group executives, who turned a blind eye to unlawful practices, including phone hacking. It allowed its so-called reporters to invade the privacy of everyone, from royalty to ordinary members of the public. This case dealt with a period between the late 1990s and the mid-2000s. But what says unlawful practices still aren't being used? We simply don't know. This story is a matter of public interest. What we are seeing on the front pages of today's newspapers, bar The Guardian, is absolutely absurd.
Inside the courtroom behind me here, a judge ruled that phone hacking had been, in his words, extensive at Mirror Group newspapers between 2006 and 2011, and that Prince Harry had been a victim, awarding him over £140,000 in damages. On the verdict, Prince Harry said he had been vindicated and that it was affirming. From California to court, Prince Harry sent these words for his lawyer, David Sherborne, to deliver.
This case is not just about hacking. It is about a systemic practice of unlawful and appalling behaviour. The court has found that Mirror Group's principal board directors, their legal department, senior executives and editors such as Piers Morgan clearly knew about or were involved in these illegal activities.
Speaking of Piers Morgan, if you cast your mind back to the 90s and noughties when he was editor of the Daily Mirror, the judge's ruling that he did know about phone hacking is significant. It's something the now presenter has repeatedly denied, including under oath at the Levenson inquiry.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence which I shall give shall be...
It is clear Mirror Group's persistent attempt to suggest that my claim was, to quote their counsel, fantastical, in the realms of total speculation, and there was simply no evidence at all to suggest I was hacked. Zilch, zero, nil, nada, niente, absolutely nothing. All of that was total nonsense.
Today, Mr. Morgan delivered his own doorstep verdict.
The judgment finds there is just one article relating to the Prince, published in the Daily Mirror during my entire 9-year tenure as editor, that he thinks may have involved some unlawful information gathering. To be clear, I had then, and still have, zero knowledge of how that particular story was gathered. I've never hacked a phone or told anybody else to hack a phone.
Stories that came out because of mobile phones. When they first came out, mobile phones, journalists found out that if the celebrity hadn't changed their PIN code,
yeah, you
right,
can access their voicemail.
You can access their voicemail just by tapping a number. Now, are you really telling me that journalists aren't going to do that?
Yeah.
If they know they can ring up Charlotte Church's mobile phone, listen to all her messages, right? Now, all you have to do, and I know it's hard because celebrities don't like doing anything for themselves, is actually change your security number.
Yeah, I've changed my security number.
And now you don't have to worry.
Exactly.
David Seymour was group political editor of the Daily Mirror. He told the court he saw Piers Morgan listening to a hacked voicemail. Today, the judge said he accepted that evidence without hesitation.
He pressed the button and played it, and out came Paul McCartney's voice singing And I Love Her. Piers was sort of laughing about it. I can't think of any other explanation other than it was something that had been hacked.
In light of this, we call again for the authorities to uphold the rule of law and to prove that no one is above it. That includes Mr. Morgan, who as editor knew perfectly well what was going on as the judge held. Even his own employer realised it simply could not call him as a witness of truth at the trial. His contempt for the court's ruling and his continued attacks ever since demonstrate why it was so important to obtain a clear and detailed judgment.
Victory for Prince Harry here, no question.
No question at all. No, it was quite brave of him, I think, to take this to court, because there are a lot of other cases that have just been settled and people have just taken the money and run. But I think he wanted the evidence tested, and Mirror Group weren't backing down, so it's quite a significant case. Well, it certainly surprised me that the hacking went on right up to and through the beginning of the Levenson inquiry. I was astonished that was happening. The British press have had so many chances to stop this kind of behaviour, dating back to a report by the Information Commissioner more than 20 years ago. And then there's the extent of concealment, destruction of evidence and lying that has gone on, not just at Mirror Group, and damages and costs that now total more than £1 billion. So I think there's a unwillingness amongst some influential newspaper groups to face up to the murky truth of the extent of what's been going on. Well, I listened very carefully to what Piers Morgan was saying. He didn't quite deny it. He denied that he had personally hacked a phone. Well, nobody would have thought that an editor would go around hacking phones. And
he said never asked anybody else
phones.
to hack a phone, that's right.
Yeah, those were his two quite narrow denials, but he didn't deny what I think was completely plain from certainly what the judge thought, which was that this was completely rife within the newsroom, and he must have known about it. I mean, the Mirror Group at the time, the Mirror newspapers were paying hundreds of thousands of pounds to private detectives every year. And it seems to me, and I think to the judge, that it was inconceivable that senior editors could not have known. It's plain that an awful lot of lies have been told to the Levenson inquiry, to the court, to the police, to the regulator, to other journalists, to MPs, to the stock exchange over the years. And of course, Levenson II, which was supposed to be looking into all of this, was closed down by the Conservative government in 2018. So it's not clear how else the truth of this is going to come out. I guess Prince Harry is doing the work that Levenson II would have done, i.e. looking into the evidence that existed of the behaviour within 2, possibly 3 newspaper groups, certainly in Harry's mind. So I think it's actually valuable that the truth comes out.
Should this really have been left to a prince to take something through the courts for us to get to the truth?
No, because I think Levenson II would have been... I always knew Levenson II would never happen. I knew that the editors and proprietors back after Levenson I had set their minds against it and ensured politically that it couldn't happen. But I think we might think that politicians should think about Levenson II, but I'm afraid it probably, in realistic terms, I don't think it will now happen. I don't think there'll be much political heat. I don't think there'll be much legal heat. I'm just being a realist here.
So perhaps this is after a very, very long time, is this maybe the end, the final chapter of the hacking story?
No, I don't think so. I think there'll be more. I think there are more cases to be heard. I think that there are more people will pursue it through the courts. More money will be paid out. Look, I'm a pensioner at the Mirror, and I'm sure every other pensioner is probably fearing that this company could collapse, and we'd be worried about whether or not there'd be enough money in the pot to pay our pensions. So it's not in our interest to bring down the company. But many of us who had nothing to do with hacking, and we are all in touch with each other, we're disgusted with what happened, want to see
the culprits brought to trial, but at the same time, we don't want yet more expensive litigation, which will imperil the future of Trinity Mirror / Reach.
Do you think that's a possibility, that the company could collapse?
Gosh, look at the state of it. They've just announced 450 job losses, more than 300 of those among journalists. They're pulling in their horns, they're closing offices. Although this is the biggest newspaper company in Britain, it is, I think, facing a very, very tough couple of years.
That if you are honest with yourself, you will now begin to understand why Prince Harry has come under such vitriolic and sustained attack from the most influential media outlets in this country. Do you imagine if I weighed in on someone on this programme without mentioning to you that they were currently engaged in legal action that could see me in very, very serious trouble? So they're desperate to silence him because he is bringing the fight to their doorstep. And I do believe that an awful lot of the treatment that he's received over the last few years has been designed to try to persuade him to stop. If you think what you've been through so far is bad, you better just take a look at this. Oh, and by the way, nice wife you've got there. Be a shame if something happened to her. That's how bad it is. That is what they've done. The sheer scale of the abuse that is heaped on the Duke and Duchess of Sussex by British newspapers is breathtaking. To humiliate him, malign him, libel him, undermine him, abuse him, have been legion. I've never seen anybody. I haven't seen serial killers come in for as much abuse from British newspapers and some broadcasters as Prince Harry has. Not in terms of the regularity, because a serial killer will be in the spotlight for a fortnight. But the idea that they'd come back to Prince Harry with the vilest of accusations and the vilest of allegations and the vilest of coverage again and again and again and again is, I think, unique. He has the guts and the capacity and the resources to refuse to be bullied by some of the most bilious and unpleasant human beings that have ever deigned to call themselves journalists. So that today is a really, really important observation to make. It is a huge victory for Prince Harry, and he has just smashed them right where it hurts. And I'll tell you something for nothing. It's not over yet.
The fallout from phone hacking and intrusion perpetrated by some tabloid newspapers was plain to see on tonight's ITV1 documentary. The pain endures. Kate and Jerry McCann became victims when their daughter Madeleine went missing in Portugal. After the Conservative government cancelled the second part of the Levenson press inquiry, the couple extracted a promise from Labour that once in power they would resume the inquiry. Mr McCann told us they want that promise kept. Sir Keir Starmer said it was not in Labour's election manifesto.
The faces of those scarred by the unlawful behaviour of some British tabloids. This ITV documentary now renewing calls for a public inquiry.
We would again like to appeal for any information
from those who went through unimaginable trauma. The parents of Madeleine McCann accused the publisher of The Sun and the News of the World of unlawfully invading their privacy, settling their claim last year, though The Sun has never accepted liability.
I swear by Almighty God that
In 2011, they gave evidence to the Levenson inquiry, which looked into the ethics of the British press.
there was absolutely no respect shown for me as a grieving mother or as a human being.
There was meant to be a second part of the inquiry, looking into corruption, but it was cancelled in 2018. In response to our documentary, Jerry McCann told ITV News the Labour Party made promises to us, alongside dozens of other victims of press intrusion, that the second part of the Levenson inquiry would proceed. Only Levenson Part 2 will provide justice to those of us who have suffered at the hands of the press. It is critical that this government has the courage and integrity to keep those promises and proceed. But today, the Prime Minister was unequivocal.
Prime Minister, will you keep that promise? And what do you say to Jerry McCann?
We've set out in our manifesto our programme for action for this government. That clearly sets out our priorities, and the second half of Leveson is not among them.
So the fight falls to perhaps the only person with the persistence and financial firepower to pursue this through the civil courts.
I don't think there's anybody else in the world that is better suited and placed to be able to see this through than myself.
But he fears negative tabloid narratives endanger him and his family.
All it takes is one lone actor, one person who reads this stuff to act on what they have read. And whether it's a knife or acid, whatever it is, and these are things that are a genuine concern for me. It's one of the reasons why I won't bring my wife back to this country. I will always protect my family, and now I have a family to protect. So everything that she went through and what happened to her is incredibly raw every single day, and that's not me being paranoid, that's just me not wanting a repeat of the past. And if anybody else knew what I knew, be it a father, be it a husband, be it anyone, you'd probably be doing exactly what I'm doing as well. I will not be bullied into playing a game that killed my mum.
How would you characterise the threats that Meghan and Harry received?
Well, disgusting and very real. I've talked publicly for many years about the threat of extreme right-wing terrorism in this country. I've often been misquoted as taking my eye off the ball, as though I think that was the biggest threat. I've never called it the biggest threat, but it was the fastest growing. And my wonderful friend and counterpart at MI5 will tell you exactly the same thing, that when I started in CT in 2015... Counterterrorism, it was about 6% of our total workload. Certainly when I left 15, 16 months ago, it was over 20% of our workload.
But there were many serious, credible threats against Meghan, were there, emanating from the far right in this country?
Absolutely. If you'd seen the stuff that was written and you were receiving it, the kind of rhetoric that's online, if you don't know what I know, you would feel under threat all of the time.
So you were convinced that there was a genuine threat to Meghan's life on on more than one occasion, on several occasions?
We had teams investigating it. People have been prosecuted for those threats.
Rebecca, I guess the new Labour government probably wasn't expecting that statement from the McCanns today, but it does put them in a very awkward position, I'm guessing.
Yeah, to quote the professor at the end of our documentary, when people are damaged, they don't just go away. And I think that's just as true for Prince Harry as it is for the parents of Madeleine McCann. And I know that they will all be bitterly disappointed at the response from Keir Starmer to our question today, that their pursuit for justice in the form of a public inquiry is quite simply not a priority for this government, despite previous Labour pledges. One phone hacking victim messaged me tonight to say that he is furious. A former Labour Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, who took part in our documentary, is one of those calling for criminal investigations. Tonight, the Met told us quite simply that information continues to be assessed.
What I really, really don't like and what I find hard to make peace with is that there are some people on one end of the spectrum who are sitting behind their keyboards writing dangerous or defamatory headlines, knowing that it's going to work as clickbait because any context in the rest of the article protects them and there's nothing you can do about it. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have Nobel Prize winners like Maria Ressa, who's literally putting her life on the line, and war correspondents who, again, are putting their lives on the line to bring us the truth. So that, to me, is the spectrum. And my life has been covered by this end of the spectrum, which I will be damned if those journalists are going to ruin journalism for everybody else because we depend on it so much.
You did say in your book, you said, I began to think at some point that Murdoch was evil. You've had very strong words about Rupert Murdoch and what you think he did in this phone hacking scandal. What is the goal of this lawsuit, which has been ongoing now for a very, very long time?
The goal is accountability. It's really that simple.
1,300 people, from what I've read, have settled with the Murdoch folks. And of the 40 claimants that originally joined with you in this action, it's down to now 2. And so you think that everybody's just settled because it just doesn't make any economic sense to continue?
No, I know why people have settled. They've settled because they've had to settle. So therefore, one of the main reasons for seeing this through is accountability, because I'm the last person that can actually achieve that, and also closure for these 1,300 people and families.
This was Prince Harry entering the ring on his first round victory over the Mirror Group last year. Now at the same court, the Duke of Sussex has landed another blow against the tabloids. After denying wrongdoing across decades, today the owners of the Sun newspaper admitted that illegal activity took place on their watch. As part of a multi-million-pound settlement, the company today said,
NGN offers a full and unequivocal apology to the Duke of Sussex for the serious intrusion by the Sun between 1996 and 2011 into his private life, including incidents of unlawful activities carried out by private investigators working for the Sun. NGN further apologises to the Duke for the impact on him of the extensive coverage and serious intrusion into his private life, as well as the private life of Diana, Princess of Wales, his late mother, in particular during his younger years.
In a monumental victory today, News UK have admitted that The Sun, the flagship title for Rupert Murdoch's UK media empire, has indeed engaged in illegal practices. This represents a vindication for the hundreds of other claimants who were strong-armed into settling without being able to get to the truth of what was done to them. After endless resistance, denials, and legal battles by newsgroup newspapers, including spending more than £1 billion in payouts and in legal costs, as well as paying off those in the know, in order to prevent the full picture from coming out, News UK is finally held to account for its illegal actions and its blatant disregard for the law. It has also specifically admitted wrongdoing against Tom Watson and admitted unlawful acts by The Sun, as well as by the News of the World against Prince Harry. The truth that has now been exposed is that newsgroup newspapers unlawfully engaged more than 100 private investigators over at least 16 years on more than 35,000 occasions. This happened as much at The Sun as it did at the News of the World, with the knowledge of all the editors and executives going to the very top of the company. What's even worse is that in the wake of the 2006 arrest of a royal correspondent, there was an extensive conspiracy to cover up what had really been going on and who knew about it. Senior executives deliberately obstructed justice by deleting over 30 million emails, destroying backup tapes, and making false denials, all in the face of an ongoing police investigation. They then repeatedly lied under oath to cover their tracks, both in court and at the Levenson public inquiry. At her trial in 2014, Rebecca Brooks said, "When I was editor of The Sun, we ran a clean ship." Now, 10 years later, when she is CEO of the company, they now admit when she was editor of The Sun, they ran a criminal enterprise. Far from being relics of a distant past, many of those behind these unlawful practices remain firmly entrenched in senior positions today, both within News UK and other media outlets across the world, wielding editorial power and perpetuating the toxic culture in which they continue to thrive. It's perhaps no surprise that all of their senior executives and editors refused to turn up to court to give evidence. The failure of each of these key individuals to come and answer questions under oath spoke volumes in itself, but their collective silence is deafening. Today's result has been achieved only through the sheer resilience of Prince Harry and Tom Watson, whose willingness to take newsgroup newspapers to trial has led directly to this historic admission of unlawfulness at the Sun. It has only been by taking newsgroup not just to the steps of court, but inside the courtroom itself, that these claimants have finally managed to extract this historic admission of guilt. As a direct result of him taking a stand, Prince Harry and his immediate family have also had to repeatedly withstand aggressive and vengeful coverage since starting his claim over 5 years ago. This has created serious concerns for the security of him and his family. The rule of law must now run its full course. Prince Harry and Tom Watson join others in calling for the police and Parliament to investigate not only the unlawful activity now finally admitted, but the perjury and cover-ups along the way. It is clear now that this has occurred throughout this process, including through sworn evidence in inquiries and court hearings, in testimony to Parliament, and until today's final collapse of Newsgroup's defence. Today, the lies are laid bare. Today, the cover-ups are exposed, and today proves that no one stands above the law. The time for accountability has arrived.
Like every other person persecuted by Newsgroup newspapers, I wish they had left my family alone. But what happened, happened. Today, I'm glad they have finally accepted responsibility. I'm glad they've apologised and acknowledged the direct harm caused by years of unlawful surveillance by their journalists and their army of private investigators, not just to my family, but to Prince Harry and his. As the formidable Mr. Sherborne and my diligent solicitor, Ellen Gallagher, and our impressive team of lawyers at Hamlins have shown, in over 1,300 civil cases, these unlawful practices were not isolated incidents. They were industrial in scale and central to the modus operandi of Newsgroup newspapers as a whole. I once said that the big beasts of the tabloid jungle have no predators. I was wrong. They have Prince Harry. His bravery and astonishing courage have brought accountability to a part of the media world that thought it was untouchable. I am sure I speak on behalf of the thousands of victims when I say we are grateful to him for his unwavering support and his determination under extraordinary pressure. If Rupert Murdoch had any decency, he should follow this corporate admission of guilt with a personal apology to Prince Harry, to his father our king, and to the countless others who suffered the same unlawful behaviour at the hands of his media empire. Newsgroup newspapers owes so many such apologies. Thousands of ordinary people just trying to live their lives have endured the same unlawful behaviour. Many were victims of heinous crimes, including victims of terrorism, grieving families, and people caught in personal tragedies. I'll never get over some of the stories I've heard in this case. I owe some apologies too. This saga has placed an unforgivable strain on the people in my life. From my former wife Siobhan, mother to my beautiful children, to my wider family and friends, I am sorry that Rebecca Brooks decided you were just collateral damage in their corporate war on the elected representatives who sought their accountability. This fight has made me reflect on what it means to settle. Legally, it's a technical term. Emotionally, it's much deeper. I wish I could bring justice for everyone Newsgroup newspapers has ruined and bullied, but I can't. Our system remains stacked against victims in favour of the powerful. So what does this case mean? Why is it so important? As the United Kingdom continues to witness tragic crimes and terrible atrocities, at least we know now that because of the work of my solicitor Ellen Gallagher and lawyers like her, victims and their loved ones are unlikely to have their phones hacked or their medical records stolen by tabloid newspapers, as routinely used to happen. At the heart of this case, and all the 1,300 others, is the important principle that no one is above the law. And in this sense, today's result represents a challenge to the criminal justice system. I finish with two questions. To Sir Mark Rowley, when you receive our dossier exposing wrongdoing, will the Metropolitan Police act? To the Prime Minister, I know you care deeply about fairness and the law, but are we really willing to continue as a country where some corporate executives are above the law and out of the reach of the police? Thank you.
It has to be said, this is absolutely extraordinary. We know that Prince Harry, as he said when he released his book Spare, he was making it his life's work to take on the mispractices of the tabloid press. This was going to be his day in court. This was going to be his opportunity to make News Group newspapers, the publishers of The Sun and the News of the World, finally answer questions about the unlawful activities that he claimed were being carried out by reporters and private investigators in order to obtain stories about him and so many other people. But what has happened today is that News Group newspapers have, in essence, given him the apology that he has wanted. This has never been about the money, as he has always said. Financially, he was always potentially set to lose out. They were offering him settlements clearly in the run-up to this trial. He was refusing them, but he knew that even if he won this case, even if he won damages, he could still potentially have lost out financially because he would have had to pay his own costs and those of the opposition. But today, as I say, News Group newspapers have released what is this extraordinary apology. They offer a full and unequivocal apology to him for what they say was the serious intrusion by The Sun between 1996 and 2011 into his private life, including, they say, incidents of unlawful activities carried out by private investigators. They also go on to apologise for phone hacking, surveillance and misuse of private information by journalists and private investigators. What is also very striking is they apologise to the Duke for the impact on him of extensive coverage and serious intrusion into his private life, so not just focusing on specific articles he was due to bring up in this case, but also say intrusion into his private life as well as the private life of Diana, Princess of Wales, his late mother, in particular during his younger years. And of course, over the years, we have heard consistently about the impact that the media intrusion had on Prince Harry, the media intrusion that he said was carried out into his mother's life, and ultimately, he says, played a part in her death. So really striking that they mentioned Diana, Princess of Wales in there. They also talk about how they apologise for the distress caused the Duke and the damage it inflicted on relationships, friendships and family over the years. And also here, when it comes down to the money, they say they have agreed to pay him substantial damages. Now, what also is really important to point out is throughout this trial, by bringing this to trial, what Prince Harry ultimately wanted to do is to make News Group newspapers also acknowledge that there was some form of cover-up, that senior executives knew what was going on within the newsroom. They knew the illegal, unlawful activities that were being carried out by reporters. That is something that News Group newspapers have never admitted to, and actually they still haven't. But what they have said is it's also acknowledged without any admission of illegality that News Group newspapers' response to the 2006 arrests and subsequent actions were regrettable, which appears to allude to these suggestions that were going to come out through this trial about emails possibly being deleted and hard drives also being done away with as well. So yeah, this is absolutely extraordinary, the fact that the Duke of Sussex today has decided to settle. Also alongside him, it's worth pointing out, was a co-claimant, Lord Watson, the former deputy leader of the Labour Party. He also has received a full and unequivocal apology for the unwanted intrusion carried out into his private life during his time in government by the News of the World. So yeah, there are two apologies here, but of course, we have this huge focus. There's always been this huge focus on Prince Harry, who was talked about being one of the last people standing when it came to wanting to hold newspapers to account.
Also going on to praise the plaintiffs, today's result has been achieved only through the sheer resilience of Prince Harry and Lord Watson. Again, I can retrospectively reflect on the role that this experience played on the collapse of Tom Watson's marriage, and then he alluded to it, of course, himself in terms and tone that a lot of you are telling me sent shivers down your spine, the goosebumps a couple of you describing. Think about what it's like to have this sort of enemy coming for you for the crime of what? In Tom Watson's case, for the crime of actually trying to find out more about the phone hacking. In Prince Harry's case, for the crime, how old would he have been when it started? So 1996, if he's 40 now. How old would he have been when it started? So 14. Good Lord. Good Lord.
This is a massively big deal. Huge, because what Harry said he wanted, more than money, was accountability.
Yes.
Now, what he's managed to get is the most voluminous, undisclosed sum of money, win, and accountability, because there's this proper apology. And that really is a double score, isn't it, of Harry getting what he wanted and a huge amount of money too. And then we all then think, gosh, what did Harry have to go through? You know, how intrusive, how difficult it must have been. You know, and I had some experience of a similar kind of thing. And you know, it's a sort of situation where you just don't know who to trust. You don't know, is it the porter at the hospital? Is it the person in the car park? Is it your best friend? Is it somebody who says they love you? You know, have you told anybody? You think, I didn't say a word. How can people know where I am, what I'm doing, where I'm going? And you know, think what he must have gone through and think how he must feel today. My goodness.
Yeah, and he doesn't have to sit on the stand for 4 days.
He doesn't have to sit on the stand. But it always struck me, though, Tom, that he wanted to, because actually he wanted people to hear in court what had happened to him.
It's very interesting because what happened yesterday and clearly the discussions about financial compensation in the first instance, you wondered whether there was going to be this battle between what he wanted in accountability and the cash. Is he going to take the cash rather than get the accountability? But I think this is actually a double win for him. Because as Vanessa says, he's got the money and he's got an admission.
Yes.
He's got an admission of serious intrusion by the newspaper. He's got a full and unequivocal apology. They say, forgive me for reading off my phone, but they say they further apologise to the Duke for the impact on him of the extensive coverage and serious intrusion into his private life, as well as the private life of Diana, Princess of Wales, his late mother, in particular, during his younger years.
And I think one of the things we haven't said is how much it has obviously been deemed worth to the group of newspapers not to have all of this out in court. Think what only would have been said and how damaging it would have been. And then people who have condemned Prince Harry as a whinger, as somebody privileged, who's making a big fuss, and why doesn't he just belt up and stop it and start enjoying his life and everything else? I think we'll have to think, if they were prepared to pay him this much, we don't know how much, but undisclosed enormous amount of money must have been, then think how much they didn't want it to come out in court.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how that transpires over the next few days, because it was all building up to the court case itself.
I mean, he may well say something too. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what he says on the back of it.
It'd be hard to resist, won't it, saying something?
I think that, you know, even Harry at some point had to settle. But look, he took them right to the courtroom door. I truly admire Harry for making this stand. I mean, he really did. I mean, he's put himself through hell. He's put everybody in the family through hell in a way. But on behalf of something righteous, frankly, which is that he was trying to sort of reclaim his childhood. He was trying to reclaim the peace of mind of his mother that was kind of, you know, sabotaged for so long with all these intrusions. So I think we really have to admire, you know, frankly, his cojones for going through this.
Indeed, because he's spoken before about, I don't think he used the word, but the sort of almost sense of paranoia when he was growing up about who was it around him who was leaking all this stuff, who is actually a friend, who's not a friend, who's just recording, who's observing. It must have been a terrible, terrible way of becoming an adolescent.
It was horrible for him, and he was hounded. All of his girlfriends were persecuted and hounded. He never knew which was his friend and which wasn't, as you say, and it was a cruel and agonizing thing he was put through. So he had a lot of anger about that. But, you know, honestly, I think at the Buckingham Palace they should be giving him a champagne reception, because the fact is that they all hate the press, and they've all been tortured, each one, you know, really, by the tabloids. Look at how Camilla was utterly tortured, you know, for all of those early years. So they ought to actually be sort of breaking out the champagne and saying, well, Harry, you did it for all of us, but I'm sure they won't be.
I'm sure they won't be as well. Do you think actually the world has changed since these events? The news of the world went under, of course, and you and I have seen a lot of newspaper apologies over the years, but I don't remember 300 words quite as grovelling, quite as fulsome as this one.
Well, I mean, they didn't have a leg to stand on, actually, in this case. I mean, they really didn't. And Murdoch has had to pay out like over £1 billion, you know, pounds to all of these litigants over the phone hacking. I mean, it has ruined, you know, really the economics of the British companies. So they wanted to settle this, but they also had a lot of motivation to settle this last bit, because Harry was really going for the so-called clean-up effort that was led by, you know, Will Lewis and Rebecca Brooks, etc., after the phone hacking. And, I mean, it was supposed to be the clean-up of the sort of culture of the paper, but actually it was a clean-up on behalf of the Murdoch family to make sure that nothing, you know, really incriminated them. And that is what they really feared. And Will Lewis, of course, who is now the CEO of the Washington Post, has had sleepless nights wondering what the hell was going to come out in this trial that was going to incriminate him, when he's now the CEO of the paper that, you know, the great Washington Post that broke the Watergate story, where he is really a pariah in his own newsroom as this kind of awful shadow of, you know, did this man destroy evidence, essentially, has been hanging over him. So for him, it was a giant relief. I think he will be thrilled. And I think just Rupert and so they couldn't have those emails come out. They saw what happened in the case of the Dominion voting machines versus Fox, when they actually had to pay an unbelievable fine, you know, in that instance. I think it was a record-breaking fine of over $700 million, which was incredible thing for having lied constantly on the air, saying that the Dominion voting machines threw the election for Biden. And of course, when all those texts started to come out, it showed that the people who worked at Fox all knew that they were actually going on the air telling a lie. So, you know, he couldn't go through that again, in fact. So there really wasn't any alternative but to what happened, I think.
Media companies survive that kind of thing. I was really interested in what you were saying just a moment ago about the other Will, the heir to the throne here, because, of course, the two brothers have been semi-estranged for a while. You said you thought the royal family should open the champagne for Harry after this. Is this the kind of moment perhaps his brother might look at him again and think, do you know what, not all bad?
I don't know. It should be. I think this could be a moment when, if William, I think it'd be a very big thing for William to do, to say, hey, good on you. You did it for us. You did it for our mother. But, you know, William had made his own settlement quietly, which greatly irritated Harry. And I'm not sure how much William really likes this pivot in Harry's image, because I think at the moment, I think you will find, we will all find, or maybe you already know, that the man in the street says, good on you, Harry, for going to do this. And I'm not sure how much William adores Harry getting that kind of press.
And what of Harry himself, Tina? I mean, this is a lot of money. He's been worried in the past about, you know, paying for the security around him in Montecito and the kind of life he wants to live. This makes him secure in a way that he hasn't felt, presumably, for a while.
Well, in Montecito, you know, 10 million doesn't get you very far.
I thought you were going to say that. I knew you'd say that.
That is sort of, you know, for 10 million, the only thing you can buy is a tear down. So I think it probably helps with a few of the, you know, gardening bills. Obviously, it would be a very cool thing if he could put it into his foundation to grow that, which is quite honestly a very, very tinily funded foundation. I mean, they haven't raised really anything much for the foundation. But I suspect that their financial circumstances will mean that it has to be kept, you know, to pay off, as you say, the security and all the debts that they might start to accrue soon if all these deals fall through. But yes, it must be a nice feeling to think that you've got, shall we say, a year's worth of bills paid.
Well, I think the tabloid press will say to you, this was a long time ago, things have changed, it was all in the past. But the question I would ask is, why are those same senior executives still in charge, and how do we know things have changed?
The Royal Courts of Justice by Nathan Sparks, Chief Exec of Hacked Off, the group which has campaigned against press intrusion. Nathan, good to see you. A victorious day for Prince Harry and for Hacked Off.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's really extraordinary what we've had today, because 1,300 claims have been settled by newsgroup newspapers over the last over a decade. This litigation has gone on now. And they've paid out over £1 billion over that period settling these claims, all to maintain this argument that the Sun was not involved in illegal behaviour of any kind. And yet today, finally, they have admitted that actually all of that was untrue, that the Sun was involved in illegal activities.
And it was that admission that was key for the Duke of Sussex, wasn't it?
Absolutely critical. And newsgroup has relied on this to dodge accountability through independent press regulation, through the second stage of the Levenson inquiry. In response to all of those, to try and suppress all of that, they have repeatedly come back, and this is one of the things they've said, this was limited in our publisher to the News of the World, it didn't happen at the Sun, and now finally they've come out and admitted that it wasn't true. Illegal behaviour did occur at the Sun newspaper.
Is there an element of disappointment for you that this didn't go to a full-blown trial and evidence and witnesses called in court?
Well, a lot of the reason why a lot of us wanted to see a trial was to get these allegations out in the open and prove it in court and avoid this situation where a settlement can stop them being heard. The fact that we've got this admission proves that it happened anyway.
Time Evan Harris joins me now. A word, if you would, on why the case didn't progress. What is the sort of legal technicalities on the relationship between the nature, the tone, and the scale of the apology? What's more important?
Well, it comes to damages. If you can't beat the offer you're made by way of settlement, then you're liable for all the court costs because you needn't have gone to trial. That's on damages. If you are suing because you allege that there was unlawful activity at the Sun and they admit it before the trial begins, right?
Yes.
Then you can't really be blamed for the court saying you got what you wanted by admission. You didn't need to take, eight weeks of court time to do it. And you will have to pay the costs of that. Now, you might say, well, what about the other allegations of perjury and destruction of evidence? That hasn't been admitted yet. In British tort law, the tort is misuse of private information. That's the harm that you're suing over.
Right.
The perjury and concealment and destruction of evidence is aggravation, and that piggybacks on a claim of misuse of private information. It's not a cause of action, to use a legal term, in itself. Therefore, you couldn't go forward with a claim of just the aggravation when you've already had satisfaction. And it is satisfaction, given the figures that are being bandied around, with the admission and the damages for what's happened to you. That's my quickest way I can explain that.
That's beautifully explained. Although, of course, it won't touch the sides of the lies and propaganda that are already being promulgated by various Rupert Murdoch lackeys and apologists who will want to portray Prince Harry as somehow having balked at the final hurdle. The point is that the newsgroup newspapers have admitted the main charge, as it were.
Yeah, they blinked first.
So they've admitted the main charge, which makes the judge's enthusiasm for allowing the case to continue disappear.
Well, we could litigate something they've already admitted, but it's pointless. And it would be why would you want to give Rupert Murdoch millions of pounds and not say, yes, okay, you've admitted it? And it's probably better to admit it than for a judge to find it, because they can contest and argue the judge was wrong. But I don't think even they can argue that their own admission was false, because that would reopen the litigation.
So not for the first time we find ourselves in a space where if you genuinely understand the facts, you can arrive at only one conclusion, what has happened, but we wait to see who pops up on various television programmes and in various newspaper columns arguing that black is white, that up is down, or indeed that Donald Trump won the 2020 election.
What you have to see with Harry is so much of what he's done over the last few years. He sets himself impossible standards, and he can't live up to them. And in this case, he had decided that he was going to be the crusader. He was going to be wielding the simple sword of truth, as Jonathan Aitken once put it. And in the end, he folded. Before the case even got going, he accepted this settlement and this apology that's been made. And now there's not going to be a court case. There isn't ever going to be anybody else taking newspapers to the courts, because it's all done. And so, yes, it's cost them a huge amount of money and it's embarrassing, but there is now a line being drawn. And I think that what it says about Harry is that ultimately he has a price like everybody else. And what was important to remember is that if Harry had been awarded a sum that was less than he was being offered in an out-of-court settlement, he would have been responsible not just for his own costs, but for Newsgroup newspapers' costs as well, which would have been millions and millions of pounds. And of course, Prince Harry's finances are something which I'm sure that Spectator readers spend sleepless nights thinking about. But what's undeniably the case is that he's a wealthy man, but without the resources of the royal family behind him, he's not that wealthy, even if Spare made all these millions of pounds for him. So he would not have wanted to have potentially this enormous bankruptcy-inducing bill around his neck. And if you're being offered a huge sum of money, yes, you can no longer stand as a crusader for truth, and you can't say, I'm going to fight this case to the bitter end. But on the other hand, you've got a massive, massive payout. You've got your apology. You can sit back and think, right, job's done. Except, of course, it completely negates everything he's been saying for years.
First significance of it is simply that they have denied under oath in a court case, under oath at the Levenson inquiry, and again publicly, that this ever happened. So they finally admitted something which they have actually been lying about, and not just ordinarily lying, but lying under oath. Now, the real question now then becomes, was this ignorance? Were they totally incompetent? Or were they actually knowingly trying to mislead a court of law and a public inquiry? And if it's the latter, that's perjury. And if it's perjury, that in itself is a criminal offence. So somebody at News is in pretty hot water for that reason. I thought that was the real thing that they wanted to avoid seeing exposed in court. The fact that there's enormous
So why
evidence.
did Prince Harry and Lord Watson settle?
30 million. Well, I think they settled because the fundamental issue in a court case is about some sort of admission. And if one side has admitted unlawful activity, what's the court case about? So you can't just run a court case because it would be interesting theatre for journalists and for the media. There's got to be a legal issue. And they've actually astonishingly come out and said, yes, despite the fact that we told people under oath that we had not done any unlawful activity in a court at the Levenson inquiry, and again in public, they've now said, yes, we actually did act unlawfully. And that's, that's a big step forward. So
they didn't say we acted unlawfully. I'm sorry to be pedantic. I'm just going by the apology, the wording of the apology today.
The reality is anybody who's seen the evidence in this case, as I did, obviously, having gone through it all.
Well, so without telling us the details, are you saying there are details that Newsgroup newspapers didn't want to come out? Totally. That's why they settled?
Totally.
Because they seem to be suggesting Prince Harry settled because he saw the list of witnesses and thought, I can't do this.
Absolute nonsense. Most of the witnesses who should have been called and cross-examined on behalf of Newsgroup refused to come or didn't come, including Rebecca Brooks, including many of the people who were editors and people in responsibility, including, most importantly, the News Corporation, from my point of view, the News Corporation executive, Fred Michel, who in an email, which has been out publicly, said very firmly that I should be targeted. Let's get Chris Huhne.
But there are still this wider issue around the cover-up and everything else. We now know there was a huge amount of illegality at The Sun, the News of the World, The Mirror, The People, all of these publishers. The Daily Mail is facing allegations facing claims next year. All of these allegations, and we still haven't had the public inquiry. This is Levenson Part 2 that was promised to the public to get to the bottom of how this scandal infected so much of the media industry in the United Kingdom. So that's what we're focused on now.
This was a corporate apology by News Group newspapers. Are any individuals going to be held to account?
Well, News Group are clearly desperate to try and protect individuals from potential consequences. And this has been sort of part of their strategy all along with these cases. But again, this underlines why the second part of the Levenson inquiry is so important. Only a public inquiry can ask those questions. We're now in a position where we know a huge amount of illegality happened, but we don't know who commissioned it, who was responsible. There are people who will have been responsible for these activities who will never be properly held to account unless we have that inquiry.
Well, I think it would have been better to have it all tested in court in the way that Harry's case against Mirror Group newspapers was tested, and the judge came to findings of fact. So we haven't got facts here. But I thought it was quite significant at the end that Lord Watson, said that they were going to hand the whole dossier of evidence over to the police. So I think in that sense, it's now in the police's decision whether they're going to carry through and look at allegations of criminal behaviour, of perjury, of destruction of evidence and so forth. So I don't think it's the end.
Stevens is an international media lawyer and often a very helpful guide through the weeds of legal questions. He joins me now and it's not the end of the story, though. As you say, Tom Watson has referred to police. David Sherborne certainly seems to think that there should be further investigations. A word on the plausibility of that, the appetite for that from the...
I think there's no appetite to look at the unlawful news gathering. We know that this is a problem of the past. It doesn't happen anymore. I think most people, despite the absence of a court ruling against News International, had accepted that there was wrongdoing there. I mean, that's why do they pay out 11 billion without there being something wrong? So, but it isn't ongoing anymore, and so I think it is right to draw a line. We have had trials, you remember, at the Old Bailey, Rebecca Brooks, Andy Coulson, etc. But so I think the police have spent enough time and money on this, and their precious resources could be dealing with problems of today, anti-terror, and strange young men in their bedrooms.
What about perjury and cover-up as opposed to illegal news gathering?
Perjury is almost impossible to prove, and I think because you're asking about the state of a mind, you've got to show that someone knew the truth and deliberately told a lie, and invariably people say they were mistaken or they were in error or they were stupid, but not knaves. And in this particular case, I think it's almost a racing certainty that although the police will have to look at it, they'll probably refer it to the Director of Public Prosecutions, it's almost certain that nothing will follow from that. So I think this is the full stop at the end of the phone hacking story.
Well, David Sherborne would disagree, or is this the performance element of the barrister's role on the steps of the High Court, calling for the rule of law to run its full course, calling for police and Parliament to investigate the unlawful activity now finally admitted, but the perjury and cover-ups along the way? It's clear now that this has occurred throughout this process, including sworn evidence in inquiries and court hearings and in testimony to Parliament until today's final collapse of NGN's defence.
Well, I mean, all of that, I think, is probably accurate. The question is, although, you know, I think just looking at it in human terms, this case was about Prince Harry having cut relationships because he believed they were leaking from him. The same with Tom Watson, and that, I think, was the very human basis of this case for Prince Harry. He's now got an acknowledgement of the wrongdoing. He couldn't really get very much more out of these hearings, which were about 120 articles. And the question remains, obviously, is there worth a second part of Leveson? Is there worth further inquiries? And I think people understand there's been a degree of accountability wherever the wrongdoing has lay, and perhaps our priorities lie in other directions at this particular point in time. And I think the public policy will allow us to move on without forgetting, of course, and acknowledging the major victory for Prince Harry and David Sherborne today.
Although, and finally, the major victory, although evident to anybody honest who understands all of the facts, will be denied by precisely the sort of people who might be reined in by a second Leveson inquiry. I don't know what coverage we're going to read tomorrow, but I'd point out briefly that the current editor of the Times used to edit The Sun. So I don't know where we're going to turn for, what's the word I'm looking for, remorseful representation from the Fourth Estate.
Well, I suspect we'll get more reasoned coverage in The Guardian and perhaps some of the foreign newspapers.
New York Times will be all over this, won't they?
Yeah, but they've been independent on this all the way through. But I think that, the real tell here is, does the Murdoch media take further revenge on Prince Harry, as Harry thinks the Mail has done, and do they continue to give him appalling coverage? Or will there be a sort of, after this flurry of denials and hubris, will there be some kind of truce called? I think a truce would be sensible from all parties.
That's a good question, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Mark Stevens, international media lawyer, just reminding us at the end there for a large part of the reason why Rupert Murdoch's empire has gone after Prince Harry like a rat up a drainpipe in recent years. If the time...
I mean, the blackening of Prince Harry's name and his wife by large chunks of Fleet Street has been really awful to watch. And it seems like an almost deliberate tactic to destroy the credibility of somebody who is a threat to them. And I suppose one thing that you hope is going to come out of this action after the really grovelling apology by Murdoch, not only to Harry but also to his mother, Princess Diana, that it would be really unseemly now if they just started that all over again now that he's won this case. Supposed to tell the truth.
And it's not just the Murdoch stable, Associated Newspapers, Mail on Sunday and so forth. There are certainly a lot of rumours. There is also outstanding legal action in that department, isn't there? This has not gone away.
There are more cases to come, and it'll be interesting to see whether Associated they want to fight through in the way that the Mirror Group did, or whether they'll do what Murdoch did, which is to not want this tested in court.
Daily Mail next.
Daily Mail carries on. It is at an earlier stage.
Yes.
It's hard for me to say, both because of my position in the legal team there, and because I don't know how that's going, which is always comfort.
Yes.
How this is going to evolve. All I can say is that they are making the same aggressive denials, possibly even more aggressively in their own inevitable style, than News Group, News UK did at the time, and their denials are such that it's hard to see them admitting or settling. But again, watch this space.
Who knows?
The news Group were able to say, we admit the News of the World, here's some money, we're not admitting the Sun.
Yeah.
Daily Mail deny everything. Therefore, it's hard for them to make what they call a commercial settlement, because it will well, I'm sure it's possible, but it would look odd set against the absolute vehement denials. You can
which they continue to make, we should be clear. Yes, absolutely. They continue to make all of those denials. Champagne corks popping later today down at Hacktoff?
I'm a man of moderate, yes.
Dr. Evan Harris, former director of Hacktoff and consultant to the claimant's legal team in the News Group litigation, responding to this absolutely extraordinary moment in British history. And I don't use that word excessively, because it's about a clash between two of the most powerful institutions in our islands, the media, the Fourth Estate, and a royal, a very, very senior member of the royal family. And let's just say it didn't go to the judges, this one. It's a technical knockout in the 12th round, and the only man with his arm in the air at the moment the only men with their arms in the air in that particular boxing ring are Prince Harry and Tom Watson.
disturbing, though, isn't it? There's a sense in which it is justice, but justice for the super wealthy. One doubts whether Tom Watson would have been involved had he not been, to some extent, able to hang the case financially on the deep coffers of Prince Harry.
Well, it was also the deep pockets of Rupert Murdoch. I mean, someone was going to lose 10 million at the end of this case, and Prince Harry has made sure it wasn't him. And in that sense, Rupert Murdoch has been able to do what he's done in other court actions, which is to buy his way out of the justice system and made sure that these allegations aren't heard. And what we've got here is the original crime, and you remember the defence there was that it was one rotten apple. And then in the subsequent 15 years of cover-up, that shifted to it was one rotten newspaper. And now they've finally admitted that it was more than one rotten newspaper. So we haven't been given the truth over a long period of time. And that matters because this is a newspaper at the heart of it. This is about journalism, and journalists are supposed to tell the truth. News organisations.
And the Murdoch executive down there at Wapping, Rebecca Brooks, her words revisited today, I ran a clean ship, meaning the Sun. That seems somewhat in tatters, to put it mildly.
Well, it was the Prince Harry's QC used the word, it wasn't a clean ship, it was a criminal enterprise. I mean, it is extraordinary that Rebecca Brooks is still in position tonight, indeed for the last 15 years, apart from the time when she wasn't. And it's difficult to think of any parallel in any other aspect of corporate life where the CEO, who's now admitted today that her company was indulging in unlawful activities while she was editor for 6 years, should still be in place.
And to those who say, oh, come on, look, you know, this is all a long time ago, the tabloids have long since been eclipsed by social media, which is much darker in some ways, let's face it. Time to move on. What do you say?
Well, you can't have it both ways. The Murdoch organisation is a powerful organisation. It sets the agenda. It wants to be noticed. Its chief executive is a very powerful person. I think the legacy media wants to be believed, wants to regain trust and see off social media. And it's difficult to see how it can do that in these kind of circumstances.
It's not a coincidence that the world has become more volatile, more divided since social media has been around for 20 years. I think hopefully we can all agree on that. So I think there's certainly a culture, an atmosphere of intimidation right now. That's certainly what I feel. And I don't believe that everybody is saying, just give us everything. I believe that the majority of people want to know that that the information isn't being censored, but that safeguards are absolutely necessary. And I believe that, you know, protecting speech and safeguards come hand in hand. And any argument to say that they don't, I think is, you know, this idea that someone's taking away, you know, free speech, that to me is a complete distraction. I would welcome the chance to sit down, not necessarily with the you know, the CEOs, but more the shareholders, because the shareholders are the ones that really are in control. And I'm sure their parents, and I'm sure hopefully they would agree that that kids need to be kept safe. But again, one of the things that's I guess has always puzzled me is that we live in an age now, or we have done, and this goes back to the tabloid era, specifically with the conversation that we were having about tabloids that you guys all heard, that we have elements of the mainstream media, legacy media, elements, not all, elements, trying to redefine public interest for their own personal interests. And at the same time, we have social media companies trying to redefine free speech for their own personal interests. And what shocks me, or what fascinates me, is the fact that that's not a conflict of interest. Because it's so clearly, you know, the loudest voices are the people who are really deeply bought into making sure that things move the way that they want them to move. And the cost is, well, they make hundreds of millions. Or billions. let's just focus on the last 6 years, the level of planting and leaking from other members of the family means that, in my mind, they have written countless books. Certainly millions of words have been dedicated to trying to trash my wife and myself, to the point where I had to leave my country. At that time, I didn't fully understand how much or how complicit the family were in that pain.
The privacy of your most nearest and dearest without permission. That'll be the accusation, right?
That'll be the accusation from the people that don't understand or haven't or don't want to believe that my family have been briefing the press solidly for well over a decade.
I work in newsrooms. It's a fact that every anti-Harry and Meghan story comes from Kensington Palace.
But why? Much of the negativity towards the couple is coming from within the royal family. The royal family and staff of the royal family are the ones that are very often leaking these stories to the press.
I mean, they can deny it all they like till they're blue in the face, but there's been an awful lot of leaking, particularly from Kensington Palace.
I was told I could say what I want about Harry and Meghan, but I had to lay off William and Kate. That was the instruction from the editor.
Although, my job is to report on the royals and to be, sometimes part of their PR spin and be positive about them.
The palace has a history of swapping stories. So if I am a reporter and I come to the palace and I say, I've got this pretty scandalous headline about William, the palace would swap out that story for a story about Harry. They'd say, I'm going to give you this story about Harry if you'll kill this William story. So this has been going on literally for 20 years or so. Harry has been a victim of this forever.
Quite frankly, he was thrown under the bus as a teenager by Camilla's, Charles's great drive to have Camilla rehabilitated. And so great relationships were made with the press and with the media so that Camilla's path would be smooth. And it took years and years and years, but it eventually happened. And along the way, Harry was collateral damage in terms of thrown under the bus with stories. And, when you think about it, Camilla is, nobody says it, but in terms that you could have been seen as the wicked stepmother.
We do know is that it's a PR strategy that the palace has done for decades. The palace absolutely has to paint Kate in the perfect light. And if that means running over Meghan Markle, to them, it's justified. Kate is going to be queen one day. So they're doing everything in their power to keep her innocent and pure.
William and Kate are very well respected. They make rounds of the people, and loads more people would rather see him instantly step to the throne than Charles.
Or are they just better at hiding the truth? Because there are some quite fruity stories about William too, if you want them.
Really?
Yes, not that we can go into detail here,
Obviously.
obviously.
So
Hello,
there are
lawyers.
some. I don't know. Always fruity stories.
There are very fruity stories about that. But this is not a battle. It's not a comparison.
Let's move on. We've done enough Harry and Meghan bashing.
The royal family manipulate the media. I'm talking about the print media, the British print media, in a way you simply would not believe. So, for example, in the mainstream press, it is verboten to write a piece in support of Meghan and Harry. It is an absolute dictum, spoken and unspoken, that the newspapers do not want and will not print pieces that are wholly positive to Meghan and Harry, and you cannot write anything negative really about William or Kate. This is because of the deals that have been done between the palace and the editors of these papers. Okay. If you look at the Telegraph Act, you will see 4 or 5 pieces in absolute eulogising praise of the Princess of Wales. And then the chances are on the same day, every piece about Meghan and Harry is negative. They literally take a baseball bat and bash this couple to pieces. The books that I've written about the monarchy is that the reason the British monarchy has survived and prospered when other European monarchies has failed is they are utterly ruthless, and their absolute goal is you have to have the spotlight on the monarch and the heir, and anybody else who comes into the picture and takes too much of the oxygen or too much of the limelight, you see is pushed out. We saw it with Diana, we saw it with Fergie, we've seen it with Harry and Meghan. They were too threatening as a unit to Kate and William. the tide turned, and I believe, Harry, that was instigated from within the palace. And you cannot fight the palace narrative. Nothing is leaked without the nod from the principals. For example, the Tightgate story. What's interesting is nobody came out from the palace and backed Meghan's story, and yet they came out and they backed Kate's story. What I think there's a deeper meaning and a deeper context, which is there is definitely no question in the British press an absolute movement to discredit Harry and Meghan and the need to bolster William and Kate, and they have to be sanctified in the press, and they are these saints. You know, I really do feel that Harry was absolutely on the money when he said we had to leave, because once this tsunami of bad press comes against you, it is very, very difficult to rise above that. She is being discredited by the establishment. She is being discredited by the broadsheet press in this country. She hasn't really been given a chance, and but it became so toxic for them. I think that they could not access the truth. Harry absolutely knew that, you know, the palace were leaking stories about them, that the narrative had to be, to discredit them in order to refocus the spotlight on William and Kate, that there was an envy after their successful foreign tours. They had star quality as a couple, just as Diana did.
The Daily Mail hate her. Don't know why they hate that black woman. You know what I've noticed? The more they hate Meghan, the more they love Kate. It's like Kate can do no wrong. Kate could murder a disabled panda cub. Yeah. The whole thing caught on camera. Kate just kicking the shit out of this tiny, defenseless, fluffy, 6-month-old, wheelchair-bound cub. Daily Mail front page, caring Kate gets panda to heaven.
Journalist about how the media inflames this. I was called by the Sun newspaper. If you don't know what the Sun is, it's sort of
got the topless girl on page 3. That's all you need
and
to know.
And they called me about a month ago to ask if I'd write about how Meghan was like Wallace and how Meghan was going to destroy the royal family and the arguments between Meghan and Kate. And I said, I'm really sorry, I'm just not privy to all of this. I don't think I could do it. And the commissioning editor was really twisting my arm to write this article and say, but you could say, couldn't you, that X happened, and you could say that she's fired all her staff, and you could say that Kate has said this. And I said, well, I'm really sorry, I don't know that, I can't do it. And this conversation went on for about half an hour, and I didn't write the article, but it just gives you an insight into how this whole thing is being, you know, the flames are being fanned by the media.
The fact is that the royal family does have a huge amount of power over the British press in this country, and if you ever want any kind of ongoing relationship with the royals, which obviously everybody does, then if you are the one who goes straight over the top and broadcasts something, especially something deeply personal, then you are going to be excommunicated from the royal pool, as it were.
Have you heard from anyone in the palace thanking you for the, serious defense of them?
I've had some messages communicated to me on behalf of several members of the royal family.
Upper level
We're very
people?
grateful that
when I was working for the BBC, a very senior royal correspondent at the BBC, I was excluded from parties and events. Piers Morgan was as the editor of the Mirror, David Yellen was as the editor of the Sun, and I used to say to them, why? And why do you plant stories? And they did plant is a strong word, give stories to the tabloids first. Why don't you come to me and I'll broadcast and they can follow me? But that was never the way this worked.
I think that most of the general public would assume that the monarchy are at the mercy of the British press, when the reality is there is a far greater level of manipulation that goes on from the royal courts to the media than Joe Public would ever believe.
The media's reporting of the monarchy is stuck in the 1950s, this kind of deferential lack of critique, lack of partiality. I mean, it's bizarre, really. Lack of impartiality. It's entirely partial and reverential. So I think in that, and the idea that, the media is a kind of PR arm of the royal family.
That, there is a complete identity crisis with the royal family. Is it a public institution? Is it a brand? Is it a private family? And we have to work out what it really is. And when it comes to being a public institution, then the transparency and the accountability should be the same as any other. If it's going to be a brand, then let's be clear that we're we're peddling a myth, an image, a brand, and we don't want to dig under the bonnet of that too much. If they want to be a private family, then you have to step out of the, you have to step off the stage, because you can't kind of have it all ways. And I sort of come back to this brand idea, which I think, to Tom's point about what is the value of the royal family. If you're going to be a brand ambassador for £65 billion, brand, then you've got to live, as any brand does, with a sort of authenticity and integrity. And I think one of the things that really frustrates me is the mythologizing of the royal family, the fact that there is a sort of fairy tale peddled, which bears no relation to reality, and that we have this sort of, as I called it in the chat, this sort of institutionalized deference that doesn't allow us to ask the right questions and, more importantly, get the right answers. So when it comes to, the sort of the huge interest in Harry and William, we know that there's a whole side of that story that has not been reported by the British media. We know that there are rumours of alleged infidelity on William's part that the UK press just will not touch. And frankly, if Harry has buggered off to Santa Barbara, having been on the receiving end of such extraordinary press coverage, while his brother has not received a single critical article in the UK.
It's just envy, isn't it? The whole point of the attacks upon Prince Harry and his wife, whether they're coming from within the palace, on the record, off the record, nowhere near the record, or whether it's coming from Fleet Street, is because they're simply better at everything. They're better at PR, they're more media savvy, they're more articulate, they're more empathetic, crucially they're more accomplished. Look at their careers, compare their careers. They're more accomplished and they're more attractive. So here is the real sin of Harry Windsor, and this only occurred to me last night. But the real reason for the hatred, the viciousness, and this astonishing level of abuse is because they make a complete mockery of royalty itself. The idea that he gets the top job and he sits in the sidecar for the rest of his life is absolutely absurd. But we can never ever admit that, because it shakes the very foundations of the royal family.
Let me show you this tangled web. So this is how intertwined everything is. Charles's reputation is in the toilet. He needs to rehab it, and his sons are more popular than he is. And he also wants to rehab his then girlfriend's image so that she can one day marry him and become princess consort, queen, anyway. Mark Bolan works for them from 97 to 02. He is in a long-term relationship with Guy Black, who is the head of the PCC, which is supposed to be regulating the media. Mark Bolan happens to be friends with Rebekah Brooks. They once went on vacation together. How nice. When Rebekah Brooks was at News of the World, she worked under Piers. Piers Morgan, also her friend. Rebekah, Piers, Mark Bolan, all friends. Piers Morgan, also friends with Camilla. And then we have another example of leaking. The Highgrove leak, which was an attempt to use Prince William's popularity to make Camilla look popular, that was leaked. Amanda McManus was the former assistant private secretary to Camilla. She took the fall for the Highgrove leak because she just happened to tell her then husband James McManus about it, who happened to be the executive of Murdoch's News Empire, which includes The Sun and the News of the World. Fun fact, Amanda McManus was quietly hired back after all the uproar died down and worked for Camilla until 2021. So just my educated guess, I'm going to say this is a case of yes and. Yes, there were coordinated palace leaks, and there was probably a good amount of unlawful information gathering by certain news outlets.
And the fact that we have now heard that Harry was told that unless he withdrew these allegations that he made, and he named an official, unless he withdrew that allegation, his allowance would be stopped. And when he said he wasn't going to withdraw the allegation, he wanted to pursue the case against the Sun newspaper, his allowance was stopped.
Meg asked me one night, "You don't think they'll ever pull our security, do you?" Never. Not in this climate of hate, and not after what happened to my mother. Also, not in the wake of my Uncle Andrew. He was embroiled in a shameful scandal, accused of the sexual assault of a young woman. and no one had so much as suggested that he lose his security. Whatever grievances people had against us, sex crimes weren't on the list. February 2020. I scooped Archie from his nap and took him out to the lawn. It was sunny, cold, and we gazed at the water, touched the dry leaves, collected rocks and twigs. I kissed his chubby little cheeks, tickled him, then glanced down at my phone to see a text from the head of our security team, Lloyd. He needed to see me. I carried Archie across the garden and handed him to Meg, then went across the soggy grass to the cottage where Lloyd and the other bodyguards were staying. We sat on a bench, both of us wearing puffer jackets. Waves rolling gently in the background, Lloyd told me that our security was being pulled. He and the whole team had been ordered to evacuate. Surely they can't. I would tend to agree, but they are, he said. So much for the year of transition. The threat level for us, Lloyd said, was still higher than for that of nearly every other royal, equal to that assigned the Queen. And yet the word had come down, and there was to be no arguing. So here we are, I said. The ultimate nightmare. The worst of all worst-case scenarios. Any bad actor in the world would now be able to find us, and it would just be me with a pistol to stop them. Oh wait, no pistol. I'm in Canada. I rang Pa. He wouldn't take my calls. Just then I got a text from Willie. Can you speak? Great. I was sure my older brother, after our recent walk in the Sandringham Gardens, would be sympathetic. That he'd step up. He said it was a government decision. Nothing to be done.
I saw my mother be abused for years. I knew the symptoms. I knew what it was like. And Tyler, how dare you compare this to the abuse of your mother? This woman was abused. And so was he. To use the institution to try and do all the things that a batterer would do, like, oh, here's what we're going to do. We're going to cut off the money. We're going to not leave you security. We're going to do all those things to make you comply and come back. And for the both of them to have the wherewithal to say, I don't give a damn if it's the palace. I'm out of here. I applauded that.
supposed to hate Harry and Meghan again today because the house that the Queen, the late Queen, gifted them, and upon which Harry spent £2.3 million of his own money, has now been confiscated by King Charles. Imagine if this was... So imagine if you were writing this story from a point of view of not having had your brain boiled by the fact that Prince Harry fell in love with a woman of colour, right? So just pretend that the world hadn't been redefined, or your attitude to the royal family hadn't been redefined by right-wing media apoplectic about the fact that Prince Harry turned the entire pyramid of privilege in this country on his head by falling in love with an actual woman of colour, right? So, and King Charles was currently much more under attack than his sons, okay? Because he used to be very much under attack for the appalling way in which his late wife and Prince Harry's mum was treated, and indeed the way in which the now Queen was insinuated into public life, having her reputation completely rehabilitated thanks to collusion with newspapers, which was, well, I think seeing her sit down for a meal with Jeremy Clarkson shortly before Jeremy Clarkson wrote that article about Meghan Markle, which reports today suggest might see him deemed surplus to requirements over at ITV, tells you everything you need to know about the nature of those relationships and those quid pro quos. So just imagine that Charles was persona non grata with the right-wing media, and that he had betrayed... This is how you'd write it. Charles betrays his late mother's wishes by depriving Harry of a home in England's green and pleasant land. I'd add that bit as well, a little bit of William Blake there. You can almost hear Hubert Parry tuning up in the background. Cruel Charles, callous Charles. I can't quite get the alliteration. Just sounds a tricky. Cheesy doesn't work. So cruel Charles betrays. Cruel Charles betrays late Queen's wishes by stealing Harry's home. Second line. Harry and Meghan denied place in England's green and pleasant land by jealous parent. You see how it would work? Because the Queen gave them a house and he's taken it away. So betraying the late Queen's wishes. That is how... Churlish Charles? Thank you. Churlish Charles? Yeah, Churlish Charles. It's tricky, that, because you're weighing up the alliteration with the stronger adjective. So cruel Charles is much stronger. Churlish Charles. Churlish Charles works pretty well, actually. Churlish Charles steals Harry's house. There it is. Churlish Charles steals Harry's house. Second line, late Queen cruelly betrayed by brutal eviction. That's the story, by the way, if you don't know what I'm talking about. Churlish Charles has stolen Harry's house. The late Queen wanted him to have it. He spent 2.3 million quid tarting it up, and money he repaid actually to the public purse after stepping down from royal duties. And lo and behold, Charles has demonstrated his, according to newspapers, he's demonstrated, let me tell you what the Daily Mail have to say about it, because we could always do with a laugh. Charles evicting Harry and Meghan from Frogmore is the act of a king putting his country first. I love showing you how twisted the media is, because if you're not an anorak like me, you probably don't notice. So that headline could easily be exactly the same story. Churlish Charles steals Harry's house. Late Queen betrayed by brutal eviction. That exactly the same story, right? But the invitation to hate in recent years has involved Harry and Meghan, because much of the British media continues to favour a man who paid millions of pounds to a sex trafficking victim who accused him of multiple sex crimes than it does to a man who had the audacity to fall in love with a woman of colour. We've got it. Callous King. Callous King steals Harry's house. That's come from Grant. He's doing a shift as a sub-editor today. Home is better than house, thank you. We're doing this together. Callous King steals Harry's home. Brutal betrayal of late Queen's wishes. That's it, right? Callous King steals Harry's home. Brutal betrayal of late Queen's wishes. And then you'd have people like Amanda Platel writing articles about how terrible he's trampling upon the grave of his beloved mother. It's so awful. It's just pathetic. It is absolutely, it's the infantilization of a nation. I mean, it's been underway for hundreds of years, but occasionally the absurdity, the hypocrisy, the base corruption of it is so irresistible that it can't help sticking its head above the parapet. Callous King steals Harry's home. There it is. So,
investigations, there have been convictions, millions of pounds have been paid out in compensation. Some will wonder, why are you still fighting?
because that evidence needs to come to the surface. And then after that, the police can then make their mind up, because this country and the British public deserve better.
Prince Harry's mission stands in stark contrast to his brother's approach. In 2020, Prince William reportedly settled out of court with Newsgroup newspapers for what's been described as a very large sum of money.
To what extent do you think that your determination to fight the tabloids destroyed the relationship with your family?
I think there's, that's certainly a central piece to it. But that's a hard question to answer, because anything I say about my family results in a torrent of abuse from the press. I've made it very clear that this is something that needs to be done. It would be nice if we did it as a family. I believe that, again, from a service standpoint, and when you're in a public role, that these are the things that we should be doing for the greater good. But I'm doing this. I'm doing this for my reasons.
What do you think of their decision not to fight in the way that you have?
I think everything that's played out has shown people what the truth of the matter is. For me, the mission continues, but it's caused, as you say, part of a rift.
You said in court documents that the Queen, your granny as you call her, supported your claim. What do you think she would think of what you're doing now?
We had many conversations before she passed. This is very much something that she supported. She knew how much this meant to me. I think she's very much up there going, see this through to the end, without question.
Question whether there's an element of payback here too?
No, I think I know that it is clear now to everybody that the risk of taking on the press and the risk of such retaliation from them by taking these claims forward is clearly not in my interest to do that. Look at what has happened in the last 4 years to me, my wife, and my family, right? So that was a very hard decision for me to make, which is how bad is it going to get?
Some people would say that you taking on these high-profile battles, but that actually attracts more attention onto you.
There is more than enough attention on me and my wife anyway. They pushed me too far. It got to a point where you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
They refused to buckle. So they decided to do everything their own way. They decided to rewrite their own rule book and live entirely by that. They decided that they would not dance to anybody's tune but their own. They are not perfect. Some of the stuff they do is a little bit silly, but my goodness me, they're brave. Imagine that. Imagine growing up in that goldfish bowl and deciding that you're going to smash the glass and see whether or not you can survive. That's what they can never be forgiven for. And nobody understands this better than the Fleet Street machine, that needs the royal family just as much as the royal family needs the Fleet Street machine. That relationship is not parasitic, as I used to think. It's symbiotic. As if my wife had been treated like his wife has been treated, all bets would be off. But I'd be declaring war. If this was 400 years ago, I'd be raising a flag on Hounslow Heath and contemplating a coup for the crown. But those days are over. The prize today is just PR.